All right, we'll start letting these folks in. Matt, Vera, good to see ya. I'm not sure. Oh, it looks like it has Matt at the end. So I saw this last time too with the Fireflies. So whoever has the Fireflies name, appreciate it. But it looks like it's Matt something kind of cut off there at the end. We'll give it just a couple minutes here while you guys are all trickling in. As always, appreciate you guys being here with us. I'm going to kind of just do my usual recap that we do for anybody that's new, and obviously so everybody's on the same page. So typically for these events, if you are new here this week or you're watching this recording back, what we'd like to do is a couple things. We like to get somebody that is a top tier talent in the Salesforce industry, take 60 minutes of their time, get to know them a little bit better. And really there's two reasons for that, right? Is one, I want to give you guys the opportunity to be able to meet people outside of myself and get tips and perspectives that I probably don't give out, somebody else's experiences. I think that's super helpful, one. And then number two is I also think it's a really good opportunity for you to meet other people that are in the Salesforce industry, especially where a lot of us are brand new, just looking to break into the industry. It's super nice to kind of have that network going and know what people kind of are posting on social and what they stand for, what they're good at. So when those things come up, you have some other people that you've met before and talked to, and you can reach out as needed for that kind of help. So those are kind of the two purposes of that. As always, these are more centered for all of you in the audience. So I know Chris a little bit. We've talked here and there over the last 3 years or so that I've met him. And, I'm happy to have a conversation with Chris here tonight. But at the same time, obviously, it's like way better for you guys to ask questions, get involved, engage with him. Because at the same time, he has a background with recruiting. So it's going to really help you guys be able to break into the industry. I'm definitely sure I can learn my own tips and tricks from it. But at the same time, all of you are kind of in that space, really hitting the grind right now, trying to figure out the best way to approach all that. So feel free. You can do two things. We either have you, I think there's like a raise your hand thing on here. You just do that, and then I can take you off mute. You can ask your question directly to Chris. Otherwise, if not, feel free to throw it in the chat. Garen, as usual, and myself will try to, I know Vera is always really great at it too. So all of us will be trying to manage the chat for you. And if you have any commentary or questions, feel free to put it in there. So to kick this off, I'm going to kind of turn some time back over to Chris for an introduction to let us know who he is, how he fits into the industry, and a little bit of background about himself. So Chris, feel free to take it away.
Great. Thank you, Jordan. And thank you all for joining us today. My name is Chris Hopper. I live in Houston. I've been in the Salesforce industry for about 7 years now as a recruiter. And prior to that, I was a technical manager, a project manager, a consultant, solution architect, developer. I had started my career in the early 2000s doing Oracle CRM, and that was a client server type technology before Salesforce came along and took a lot of the market share around from the CRM market. And so I had been in the trenches for about 15 years as a delivery person, right? So started out, got trained in Siebel, which is now owned by Oracle, and got deployed to projects. I started my career in consulting. So I got hired in by a company called Unisys, moved into Accenture. I was with Accenture for 5 years, moved into the technical realm as far as architecture goes, technical PM. And part of my role at Accenture was to be a career counselor. And so what I was doing a lot as a manager there was bring in, when new people got hired into Accenture, my role was to get them acclimated to consulting, get them acclimated to the technologies we were working on, and kind of show them the walks of life of a consultant, really, and how to deliver projects. And then back in 2008, I decided to leave Accenture and went independent. So I was an independent contractor for about 8 years and just doing my own consulting. I had my own LLC started up. It was just to be an independent contractor. And then decided to leave the day-to-day delivery and get into recruiting. I had known the owner of Imperial Staff where I worked for a number of years. He had staffed me on a project, on multiple projects when I was an independent consultant. And I told him I was looking for something different. He said, Chris, take a look at Salesforce. You already come from a CRM background. You have a technical know-how. You've been a manager. You know how to hire. You've hired people before. And so it was really an easy transition for me to get over to Salesforce from my prior background. And so it's almost 7 years now and been a recruiter in the space. I think I've initially found Jordan because he was doing a lot of LinkedIn content sharing back in the day, where he was showing different flow designs I think he was doing, and different videos that he was creating. And that caught my attention because there wasn't that many people doing it. And I still don't think there's a lot of people doing it even today. And so one of my messages to the community for those newcomers that are just starting out is to use social media. I know Jordan talks about this a lot as far as getting yourself out there and known in the community. And so past 7 years, most of the roles that I've been working on over that time have been more technical in nature: architects, developers, some senior management positions as well, but SAs, TAs, senior devs, integration architects, things like that. Occasionally I get an admin position. Occasionally I get a customer who's looking for new Salesforce, like a new Salesforce talent that's coming into the ecosystem. But one thing to keep in mind around external recruiters is the way that we get paid is whenever we place somebody into a position, right? So we charge a finder's fee to a company whenever they reach out to us and say, Chris, we need someone with these specific skill sets. Now, typically, external recruiters don't get pulled into helping companies recruit for entry-level talent, because if they post a job on LinkedIn or post a job on various job boards, they'll get more than enough applicants that are probably qualified for the position to be able to have a pool of resumes to pick from. Where I get pulled into is those really niche positions where there's not a whole lot of availability for a particular skill set. And that's where they struggle to fill the position themselves, or using their internal talent acquisition department. And then so they're willing to pay a fee, a finder's fee, to an external recruiter like myself, because they're struggling to fill that position through referrals or network, whatever means they've tried. And now they're willing to basically pay a service fee to be able to hire me to find that person for them. And then when that happens, I'm kind of all hands on deck at that point, using my network, using LinkedIn Recruiter, using various other channels to go outbound and reach out to folks about and offering this position. But yeah, so that's kind of my background and what I've been doing over the last 7 years in the ecosystem. I used to post a lot of content on LinkedIn. I still do occasionally, just not as much as I used to. But I'm always advocating for those that are looking to break in to be an avid LinkedIn content creator, right? To have a digital portfolio. And there's just got to be a number of things that you need to do as a newcomer to help stand out, because the market is very crowded, right? Especially over the last couple of years, because a lot of people have seen the advertisements about Salesforce and the type of job you can have and being remote, and the type of salaries that you can have and things like that. And so when that happened over the last few years, a lot of people jumped in, like you were jumping in, and did a career pivot into being a Salesforce admin or a BA or consultant or whatever path you choose. But the challenge now is that it's getting saturated, right? And so strategically, and I'm sure Jordan talks about this quite a bit, we need to figure out ways to help you distinguish yourself from others, right? Because you can almost guarantee that any position that goes out on LinkedIn that's an entry-level admin position or entry-level BA position, they're probably getting hundreds of resumes that may look and feel a lot like yours, right? So what are you doing personally to help yourself stand out? And the one thing I've advocated a lot is, the digital portfolio. So just a short story about how I stood out when I was just getting my career started, and this is 23 years ago, but when I was starting as graduating from school, and there's a lot of entry-level college graduates with computer science or MIS degree, and the space was crowded for me as far as getting my foot in the door somewhere. But I had written a lot of C++ code, right? And so part of that, we didn't have the whole digital social media platform 23 years ago. So I brought with me printouts of the actual code that I had written, some of my CS classes, some of the projects that I worked on, in order to display that to the interviewing panel. And it was one way that I could just differentiate myself from others, because not everyone was willing to do that. I was allowing the senior leads that were interviewing me to poke holes in my code and talk to me about things I was doing wrong and things that I could have done better. I just had to come in with, without a chip on my shoulder, because I was kind of being a little bit of, just showing the ability that they can correct me, but having, kind of putting all on the line and being willing to do that. I think it's important. I think it's important to be able to show, that you have a level of, a small level of knowledge that you have already, but you're still working on building more. And that helped me get my first position, right? Sometimes the interviewing panel may not care about the digital portfolio or not look at your code in detail, but I think it's better to have it in case they ask versus only having your resume on hand. So that's a little bit about myself, but I'm glad you guys are here. I love answering questions. I do these kind of discussions all the time, at least once a quarter, with various folks like Jordan, who just want to, hear a little about the job market right now and hear about different ways and strategies to help you stand apart. One quick thing about the job market now, things have slowed down considerably on my end. Now, I'm only a small fish in the overall big Salesforce recruiting pond, so please take the things that I say in today's conversation with a grain of salt, because there's the big consulting or there's the big headhunters out there, the big recruiting companies like the Mason Franks of the world that have probably tens or hundreds of different recruiters that are working for a global company like that. Imperial Staff's a small company in Houston. I kind of run the whole Salesforce recruiting arm of it. And so I can just speak to the things that I'm directly impacted with, right? And it's only a handful of customers. So just keep that in mind as we talk about these things, that, what I say is just from my personal experience, but I think if you talk to other recruiters, you may get a little bit of a different opinion. But I feel like I have a pretty decent, viewpoint on the job market. And over the last probably 3 or 4 months, things tend to have slowed down as we started to hit the end of last year and even to the beginning of this year. I talked to a few other Salesforce consulting companies because they asked my opinion on the market over the last week or so. And I've told them the same things. I think some companies are just not, they're kind of still having a little resistance to hiring because there's some economical uncertainty. I think that's still happening in the market as a whole. We're kind of still getting through past COVID, and people were on a hiring rampage for many, for a long time post-COVID, and now things are kind of settling back down, whereas they're not sure, if they want to hire now, wait until towards the summertime, or really kind of still trying to fill out how 2023 is going to play out from either the Fed hiring interest rates and things like that. So that's kind of what I've seen in the job market here recently. And I've seen a couple of posts on LinkedIn lately that people are struggling a little bit more on the entry level side more than they have in the past. And I think that's kind of where we're kind of seeing things right now. But that being said, there's no, don't hesitate to continue to do all the things that you're doing today, just because I said things are slowing down a little bit, because you still gives you an opportunity to continue to work on your skill set, get certified, build out your digital portfolio, make a social online presence, because once things start picking up again, you already have all that foundation behind you.
I love that. That was an awesome introduction to kind of recruiting, what you're seeing as a foundational level. So that was super helpful.
Right.
One thing I wanted to ask and if you have specifics, awesome. If not, just like ballpark, but when you say things are kind of slowing down, could you give us like a ballpark of like what you were recruiting when it was at its peak per month, and then what it's looking like right now, so we can gauge what you mean by that?
Sure. So, and one thing to keep in mind is that some customers start me out in recruiting for a Salesforce position, and then they turn to other technical needs that I have as well. And so let's say, just for example, any given month this time last year, for example, I would have, 5 to 8 open positions in a given month, right? And that could be some entry-level positions, maybe 1 or 2 of those, some dev positions, some architect positions, maybe a BA role, right? Now, for the month of February, for example, I think I have 2 to 3 right now that I'm recruiting on, right? So I would say about it cut in half basically between this time last year and where I'm at today. And the other piece of this is that customers are taking a little bit longer to make a decision, right? So we're seeing an elongated time frame between a customer turning to me asking for help. I find somebody, and just an example of just something that turned up yesterday, whereas a company usually hires somebody within 2 weeks. This time last year, here we're in week 5 and they're still going through the interview process, right? So they don't have the same urgency in hiring today as they did this time last year, right? Because still think they're on the consulting side, there's still some projects that are in their pipeline, and a lot of times they hire based on what's happening from a revenue standpoint and how many projects are coming through before they hire additional consultants. But even in the industry side, companies are, if someone, let's say someone left the company, they're handing some of that work off to maybe an internal employee right now. Maybe they posted a position on LinkedIn, but they're being a little bit more selective. They're taking a little bit more time. They're kind of just trying to see if things will work out without that individual and having someone else take up that workload. But if they find a perfect candidate come through, then they'll start maybe picking up the process again. So, in short, Jordan, I think it's a combination of volume and elongated cycles as well when it comes to hiring.
Cool. And I like that you said that too, because we've had a few folks in here go through interviews, and that's what it's felt like to me, as like they've been willing to share that process with me. It's like, man, these seem to be going on for quite a bit longer than what I was used to, what I've done in the past. Like you said, that 2 to 3 week time frame seems pretty familiar. Right. Whereas in a lot of these cases, it's been, in some of them, like a couple months going through this as they're trying to figure it out. So really cool to hear that. I know, Vera, you've had your hand up for a second, so feel free to jump off mute and ask a question.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. Hey, Chris. So I watched a recent session with the Town Stacker group.
Okay.
I think you were there recently. So thanks a lot for the amazing insight. I really love that. So in tech and in Salesforce, we really prioritize our digital portfolio and obviously the resume as well. One question that I wanted to ask was, how useful do you think cover letters are in the Salesforce job market? So I know you should do everything to stand out as an entry-level candidate, but I'm just genuinely curious how they're viewed or if they're even read. Because when my dad was hiring, he said that he didn't even read cover letters. So I'm just curious.
And you can ask the same question to 5 different people and probably get 5 different opinions on it. I like them, right? And I've hired people from them because it gave me, so an individual I got hired a couple of years ago, she had a digital portfolio, she had the cover letter, she had a good resume, she had her act together, right? And I'm not saying cover letter means you don't have a cover letter, you don't have your act together, but she just had everything that you could want, right? So it was good for me to be able to go in different directions to understand her story and how I could put the pieces of the puzzle together versus having any gaps, right? So I think the cover, because the resume doesn't really give a good story to me. It's just, sometimes it's lines of bullet points, the short summary at the top of it. To your Tad's point, as a hiring manager, he may just not have the time or bandwidth, or he just didn't feel the need to it. Because if he's hiring experienced people and the resume of that individual met the mark of what he was looking for, then in that case, cover letter didn't really add any additional value, right? In your scenario, to me, it's a little bit different situation, right? You kind of wanted to show a story about where you've come from and maybe why you got into Salesforce and what you're looking to do in your career. And so I think it just paints a little different picture for newcomers versus someone who had been in an industry for 20 years. Like if I was probably going into the job market right now, I don't know if I would have a cover letter. I just don't think it would be that much, it wouldn't be needed, to your dad's point. So I really think it just depends on what an individual is hiring for. And to me, it's why wouldn't you have it? I guess is my question, right? It's a little bit more time and energy you put into it, but if it tells a good story, then, if someone doesn't read it, then they don't read it. I still get resumes a lot of times with cover letters, and I read it because I just enjoy learning about someone's background and trying to because part of the job as a recruiter as well is when I'm submitting an individual's resume, I have to build a story around that, right? And so having that cover letter, in addition to the phone conversation, in addition to the digital portfolio, in addition to the resume, gives me really all the artifacts that I need to be able to feel comfortable submitting a candidate's over to a particular hiring manager or the internal talent acquisition department, right? And so that, having that cover letter gives me a little bit more meat and substance to be able to leverage when I'm doing that summary write-up.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that adds a lot of context there. And I like that you kind of highlighted just barely of saying, like, what's the worst case scenario in a way, right? It's like, okay, hey, I take whatever it is, the 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 30 minutes to fill this thing out. And if they read it, that could set me apart and that helps. And that's awesome. If they don't, okay, well, I'm where I would have been anyways, right? And I didn't really
Right.
lose much by taking the time to do this. So that's a great
Right.
perspective to have on it.
Right.
As far
Yes, Jordan, and then in your cover letter, if you could talk about the things you research on the company, right? And gear that cover letter towards the company and whatever you read in an annual report or wherever you see on the social media channels and their websites. I mean, think about it. If someone opened that and saw that you put that additional effort into the cover letter specific to the company that you're applying for, I mean, again, there may be a chance they don't read it or even bother, skimming over it or whatever the case may be, but plus it just shows that you put the extra effort in versus just hitting the easy submit button on every job posting that you see on LinkedIn, right? You got to think about ways to stand out, and that one is just putting the due diligence and time and energy to help you stand out.
Yeah, and speaking of standing out too, I think a cool question could be, to kind of set the context here, is like anything in general when you're selling something, right? Like if you have a product and you're trying to sell the product, the number one thing you're trying to do is you're trying to get into the head of the person that you're trying to sell it to. So you're trying to find that target audience, and then you're trying to think like, okay, if I'm going to sell whatever it is, a paddle board, who's my ideal customer? What are they looking for? What kind of features do they care about? Where do they use this thing? Is this lakes? Is this oceans? Whatever, right? And you kind of go down that list. And so what you're trying to do is you're trying to flip the script to be like, here's my customer, and like, what are they thinking about? Where did their eyeballs go? So that same kind of question for you, I think would be helpful for us to know, is like, you as the recruiter, where are like the first places you go look when you get an application turned in? Is it,
Sure.
I go right to their LinkedIn and I start searching, or what do you do?
Yeah. So if their resume has any links to it, right? It could be their GitHub, it could be to their website, it could be to the LinkedIn profile, whatever those links are. After skimming the resume briefly, I'm usually going to those various areas that are links in their resume. If they don't have any links in the resume, I'm doing my own research to find out who this person is, right? So I'm going on LinkedIn first, do a search for them, and take a look at, does their resume, first of all, does their resume match their LinkedIn profile? That's important, right? Are they specific enough in their LinkedIn profile so there's not any gaps, right? So there needs to be some coherence between your resume and your LinkedIn profile. And then are there any recommendations, for example, in their LinkedIn profile? I'm looking at that and reading the recommendations that other people may have given them. Have they posted any articles? How active are they in the community, right? In the Salesforce community? Have they shared anything? Are they commenting? All those things to me mean something. And some recruiters may not bother with any of that stuff, but for me, I'm trying to build a story in my head, like you said, Jordan. And the way to be able to do that is by doing a little bit of a private investigator work as a recruiter to understand where someone's been, what they've done, how are they standing out, right? I'll go to verification on certifications once in a while, not very often. There's just a lot of mess in the certification world where sometimes people say they're certified and I can't find a certification, or it's under a different name and all that, garbage. But for the most part, I'm not really verifying certifications anymore. I'm just really looking about what they've done, what they've accomplished, and what kind of, how do you make it easier for a recruiter and a hiring manager to find out about you, is really one of my number one goals in my head when I'm getting a resume.
And on that same note too, is when you have some of that experience, right? Like I'm imagining at you as a recruiter, like it's got to have some pull when you go to somebody's LinkedIn and you're like, okay, who applied? You go and look and they have something like Google or Meta or, PayPal or something like that on their background. I feel like that would have a lot of pull. For people in our group, obviously kind of just trying to break in, I think the common question, and we see this everywhere, but it's the common question is, if I don't have that kind of pull, I don't have that experience, what would you say, you as a recruiter, if it's entry level, what's like the number one thing you would look for to be like, okay, yeah, these guys are legit and this is how I know, and this is why I'd want to hire them?
Yeah, so I think a couple of things come to mind is their career progression, right? Have they been able to excel in wherever field they came from, right? Or they kind of just been, sitting in a corner and doing not much of anything with their career. So I look for career aspirations, regardless of what field that they've been in, and that they exceeded and excelled at something, right? That's kind of because that's a good indication to me that if they've done that before doing something else, then they're probably going to be able to excel in the Salesforce industry as well, right? So that's one thing that I pay attention to. Also look for those transferable skills, right? Have they had any kind of leadership positions? Have they been able to do some public speaking? Have they been able to solve an issue, a problem, and how have they been able to drive, success or revenue for a company? It's kind of all those small things as far as you've gotten hired, you've worked somewhere else. What was the, ROI for you being as an employee at a particular company, right? What did you get accomplished? Did you reduce expenses? Did you drive revenue? Just those kind of things are what I often pay attention to, and kind of metrics that are out there about increases in business or whatever the case may be, managing multiple people. There's so many different, layers to this that it's not just one thing that I particularly look for, but it is just understanding transferable skills, leadership positions, education level. Sometimes, again, that's not mandatory. I just like to see where people come from, because one thing that for me is looking for developers, it becomes a challenge sometimes when I see someone that has, an undergrad degree that's in history, and then all of a sudden jump into programming for a year. Most times they're not going to do too well for a customer that I'm recruiting for. That the first part of the interview is a technical assessment and writing code, right? I just don't think someone has experience in doing that after a year under their belt, not coming from an education background of coding or computer science, or I see nothing else in their LinkedIn profile or resume that shows that they've been programming when they were 12. So, and so again, that career history on the transferable skills is important to me, so I can help, because then I'm willing to have a conversation, reach out to the individual just to help make sure that the stars align in my mind as I read them, as I'm communicating with that person one-on-one through a phone screen.
I like that. And I also wanted to point out too, I think you've done a really good job of walking through in an indirect way how you would set up your profile for LinkedIn. I got this advice a while back, but it was, if you're ever wondering how to sell anything, just go look at like an Amazon product, because they nail it. Like your brain is going nuts as soon as you look at like a product on Amazon, right? Because of everything you just said, right? Like when you go, you have a very clear title of what that product is. Right underneath it, you have how many stars, how many reviews it's had, which to your point, recommendations. Right. Then you have something usually like if it has Amazon choice. Okay, cool. Even better. That's kind of like your certification with Salesforce. Yeah. And then obviously on their side too, they like, this one would be kind of tough, but they also have like that urgency matter of like, hey, I'm looking for something now, or in other words, like you can get this product soon if you order today type of idea. Yeah. So I like that you kind of pointed out all those different layers indirectly of saying like, hey, as a recruiter, like that's basically what I'm looking for. So if you're like confused really how to sell yourself like that, you can easily look at these examples of something else of, well, how do people sell products? Because in other words, that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to sell yourself as a product to the company there.
That's right. And one thing to think about is if you switch the seat around, and if you are the recruiter or you're the hiring manager or you're in the internal HR, talent acquisition department, why would they pick you? And I'm not saying that to be mean. I'm just saying, you got, like Jordan's saying, switching the seat to see, being the viewpoint of someone else looking in at you, right? And what are you showing that says I'm worth your time to be reached out to, right? And and you kind of had to put your ego aside to some extent, because you probably are pretty good at what you're doing, but no one's going to notice that because of just a well documented resume, right? Unfortunately, that is table stakes when we're talking about entry-level positions. So it's got to be those things that you go above and beyond, other than just a good resume.
I like that. Let's move into like the next part of it. We've talked, I think, pretty well about kind of what you look for, what your eyes go to when someone submits an application. How about when you first get on the phone with a candidate? So you find somebody, you're like, nice, these guys have the part. I liked the story. What are you looking for as a recruiter when you talk to them in general to kind of guide you forward to be like, this is a yes or it's a no?
Yeah. So initially it's, having a warming conversation, right? And so what I mean by that is just kind of a general meet and greet, right? Because I know sometimes folks feel under pressure when they're talking to hiring managers or even external recruiters. And so I try to go in very with a friendly type of demeanor to the conversation, right? And I ask them about kind of their career history. Talk to me a little bit more about kind of where you've been and where your job history looks like. And I kind of lead off the resume some, Jordan. So I'll look at the resume, and if I feel like we're not flowing that well initially, then I'll might pinpoint a couple questions directly targeted toward those resume. But I kind of leave it up to the applicant initially to see how they pivot and how they're able to conversate from the beginning. And based on that, it's kind of ebbs and flows. But to begin with, it's understanding a little bit more about where they've been and maybe why they've gotten to Salesforce, what they've been doing in Salesforce for the last 3, 6, 9 months, however long it's been, why they chose Salesforce as a new profession for them. I like to hear people's stories, right, about why they decided to make a pivot into Salesforce. And so you need to have the communication ability to help sell yourself about why you're interested in this particular technology. And then if I see they went through a program where they're doing projects, I'm going to ask them pinpointed questions about those projects. And that's going to be, what is your role in that particular project? What is the biggest takeaway that you've had for that project? What are some issues that you ran into and how are you able to navigate around those? Is there a particular part of Salesforce that you enjoy the worst or the least, right? And talk to me about that type of work. If we're talking about certifications, I asked them questions about certifications and were those a challenge for you? Did you what did you feel? How did you feel about those tests? And then ask a little bit more about career aspirations, right? So if you're able to look 5 years down the road, 2 years, whatever the road, 5 years down the road, as far as where your career is going from a Salesforce perspective, where would you like to be? Right. And it just gives me a little bit of perspective about somebody, about what their aspirations are long term. And then, it's really talking a little bit more about the position, obviously, because I want to make sure that this person is comfortable about the interviewing process, what they're looking for, why I think you're a good match. And I usually will tell you, I think this position may not be a good match because here's what they're expecting. And the way that you've come across, I don't think you're quite there yet. Because I want to be really transparent to the individual and respect their feelings along the way too, because I don't really want to set them up for failure. So I want to be transparent as far as, because I have some customers that go right to build a flow in the first round of the interview, right? I'm talking about screen share, build a flow and see how well you can do that. And a lot of folks say, no problem, Chris, I built a flow before in the past, but when it comes down to crunch time and being in front of the hiring manager and building a flow, they stumble, right? And so, that's just part of the evaluation process. And I want to make sure that, and some people say, Chris, that's too much stress for me. I'm not there yet. Maybe check back in with me in 3 or 4 months when I built a few more flows. And so, I think it's important as a recruiter to also educate the applicant about what is at stake here when it comes to the interview process, how many rounds are involved, who they're speaking with, what the length of the interviews are, just what to expect. And sometimes we don't, as recruiters, we don't get all that information from the hiring managers or from HR. Sometimes we get a little bit of information as far as the process goes, but it depends on how good the relationship is with the company that we're recruiting for. But I try to disclose everything that I can. But if you talk to external recruiters, it's your job also as an applicant to ask those questions, right? Sometimes they may not know, but the more information you have at your disposal prior to being submitted or prior to being called in for the interview, I think the better shot you have at passing the interview process.
And when you're talking to them through these things, I think that was a good understanding of like some of the questions you're going to ask and the cadence that you go for, and also why you're asking those. How important is it to you in the way they respond, like their soft skills? How much does that stand out as you're talking to them?
It's very important because I know there's a good chance that during the interview process with the company, there's going to be a cultural personality communication assessment along the way. So if you're struggling having that conversation with me, there might be a chance that you don't do too well in front of the people that it actually matters. Like I'm just the first stage in the process, and I try to be as easy as my time is a little bit more available than hiring managers a lot of times for companies. But I also understand that if people get a little nervous because they're just kind of starting out their career in this new world of Salesforce, there's going to be maybe a little bit of anxiety and nervousness, and so I'm willing to accept that, Jordan, I guess to some extent. Or if I need to have another conversation, like saying maybe this isn't the best time for us to talk. Let's check back in a few days when your nerves are settled, or maybe there's something going on personally. I don't know, but I also want to make sure that our conversation has to flow. If it doesn't flow, then we're going to have an issue because I don't really feel comfortable. There's somewhat of a risk necessarily, but my job is to make sure that I present a candidate in the best light. And I have a little bit of, risk on my side too, to make sure, especially for a new customer that's reached out to me the first time, my job is trying to find the best candidate I can in the process that is going to be able to pass the interview and they're going to like, because I want them to give me more business as a recruiter down the road as well. So it's kind of, I'm putting my butt on the line to submit somebody along the way too. And so it's kind of some give and take, Jordan, as far as that communication skill goes. But, I'm willing to look through it to some extent, but if communication is just really a challenge for them, I think they just need some more prep interview time before they talk to myself or the hiring managers or talent acquisition department.
Okay, that's good to know. And it sounds like right off the top too, though, you're already looking for that when you talked about transferable skills and how well they're going to prepare for that type of role.
Yeah.
Because I guess, as both of us know here, it's like, depending on what you're trying to apply for, obviously most of these folks are going to be going for an admin position. It's like, that's people facing, you're talking with stakeholders all the time. So that is part of it. And I love to hear that you have the same take on this, which is like, yeah, it might be nerve wracking. It might be some anxiety involved, but like, that's what it's also going to be when you get hired too.
That's
like
right.
you're going to feel the same way when someone like a VP comes and talks to you about whatever, right? Like that type of authority coming down to you to talk to you about something, you're going to have to try to figure out how to handle yourself in that situation as well, which is part of the job. They want someone to be able to handle that. So that's awesome advice there. Another direction I wanted to kind of go here, now that we've talked about some of the foundational things, interviews, what you're looking for, is the job market itself. So I know you brought this up at the beginning with it kind of being slow.
Yeah.
In your predictions, though, being in the recruiting world, where do you see like the most needed role right now? Is that marketing cloud? Is that admin still? Is that developers? What seems to be kind of the most in-demand job right now?
Yeah, I think there seems to be still a combination of if you can get a good grasp of flows, right, as an admin, right, I think you're going to set yourself apart because flows aren't easy to learn, right? I mean, that's more the one, to me, that's one of the more challenging aspects of being an admin, right, versus anything else that's out there, in my professional opinion, right? And so a lot of people stumble because you're starting to fall over into the dev world, right? When you talk about flows and variables and loops and things like that. And so there's a lot to flows that you have to get your arms around. And if you don't come from a programming background, it can get a little hairy to understand that. So, to answer your question, Jordan, I think those admins who are getting a grasp of flows can understand them well, whether it's record-based trigger flows or screen-based flows or time-based flows. And there's a different varieties of those. And you building out some of those in your digital portfolio, I think that's going to help you. Now, I've got a few entry-level people hired because they build a digital portfolio and they've had some flows built and they had a YouTube video about the flows that they built and were able to articulate and communicate very well as far as what they did, why they did it, and what the flow actually did. And they were able to get into the company and they're doing a very good job now. They've been there over a year as an entry-level consultant. So that's one piece, Jordan, as far as on the admin side. If you're doing reports and dashboards and page layouts and field validations, again, I know some of that stuff can be challenging coming into the Salesforce world, but unfortunately, everybody has to master those anyway, right? And it's kind of the tipping point is going to be on the flow side. if Apex is too much to take on, right? Apex, I think, would be the gospel, so to speak, as far as being an admin and being able to write some triggers. And that gets even hairier than flows do. But having that technical ability to write a trigger or write a little bit of Apex code, I think would also be valuable. Now, CPQ, that continues to stand out in my mind. I've had CPQ positions for configure price quote positions for a number of years, and there's just not enough people that understand CPQ. And a lot of people don't want to understand it. I've talked to some people that have had a project or two with CPQ and said, Chris, appreciate the offer, but to be honest with you, I never want to see CPQ again in my life. Right. So that is one of those technologies that either you love or you hate. And if you can understand it and understand how it works and be good at it and be an expert in CPQ, I really think, because I know some CPQ architects that are making high 100s, low 200s, and that's just been their gospel to get to the next level, right? They've just been a CPQ expert, and they're making a great salary and making a good living off of that. There's also, as Salesforce evolves, you continue to see different products out there, but I don't want to go too far into all these different variables, because I think that sometimes distracts us as far as making sure we're well situated in the foundation of Salesforce core, right? When I say core, I mean sales and service, right? You got Experience Cloud and Health Cloud and Marketing Cloud, and there's still, those roles are still out there. But a lot of times when I see people on the entry level side, they feel like they can just continue to, get all these certifications under their belt about all these different technologies, but still can't land a job because they're spread to, I guess, with a lot of breadth, but not deep enough in the core areas of sales and service. So I think that's kind of what I would recommend, Jordan, as far as technologies go, and understanding, flows first and foremost, because of where I've seen people, like, I just had one customer who's, I've probably submitted, 10, 12, 15 people over there, and all of them conceptually understand flows, but when it comes to drilling into a little bit more and maybe building one out in real time, they just didn't understand it well enough. And I know it's hard to try to understand something without having enough experience, but you got to kind of get creative, I think, a lot of times. And there's a website, I can't remember right offhand what it is, but it has flow challenges, right? So it has 15 or multiple flow challenges about different real world user experiences that you can build a flow around to get you some more reps.
Yeah, that's really good advice, because I've talked with some of the folks here about the same idea, where you said it becomes an issue where there are so many certifications now. That's changed over the last 2-3 years.
Yeah.
And there's so many different products coming out. It just feels like every year we just get dumped on with like this huge other update of like, okay, now there's all this stuff that I got to figure out and learn. And even myself being seasoned now with, 5-6 years this year, going into Salesforce, I still feel that same way, because it's like, it feels like now, especially being in this consulting role, depending on the project I take, it just feels like, oh man, here's another thing I don't know that's fairly new, and I got to figure out this product. And it really does turn you into that thing where it's like, okay, for example, I've done a couple projects now in like Omni Studio. I'm not super familiar with it, but it's like, all right, I kind of know some stuff. But to your point, that's not going to really help if somebody wants me to like be really knowledgeable about Omni Studio, building flex cards, building scripts. It's like, all right, I've done like 1 or 2, right? Or I've kind of dabbled in Marketing Cloud, or I've kind of dabbled in this. So I like your advice there too, talking back of just saying, yes, there's all this stuff. Yes, there's all these certifications, but as an entry-level person, what you really should be focusing in on is the core stuff, and actually mastering the know-how stuff that almost, I don't know the stat, but I want to say in my experience, it feels like 90% of the jobs that I try to apply for are going to fall into those buckets where it's like, okay, yeah, we got to have you do flow. We got to have you know, like some service stuff.
Yeah.
And the core ideas of what Salesforce is, and be good at that, because that's really what we need to get this kicked off. Right.
Right. I mean, if you look at job descriptions, for example, just of Salesforce admins, just take 80% of those, right? There's going to be one-offs here about writing APIs and just this bogus stuff that you'll see in job descriptions once in a while. But if you take about the core stuff, you'll see the same patterns across all the different positions, right? And so becoming an expert and becoming very sufficient in those particular 80% of the bullet points you see in the job descriptions, if you focus on those, I think you'll be much better positioned for, and don't let these other things just distract you, because Salesforce is a noisy world out there with all the chatter, right? And I think unfortunately for newcomers, that chatter can get your head to spin too much and cause you to lose focus on the things that you really need to pay attention to.
Yeah, love that. I know Vera just raised her hand. So Vera, feel free to ask your question here.
Hi again. So I know that some of us have been doing programs such as Town Stacker and Clicked, and I know that you, more than some recruiters, are very knowledgeable about this, since I know you often go to Town Stacker and talk. How are programs like Town Stacker or Clicked like viewed by hiring managers or recruiters or people in that space? I'm genuinely curious. Yeah.
I just saw a Reddit post today. I responded back to it, or it was a Twitter. Someone tagged me on Twitter today about, you know, the programs that are out there, whether it's Talent Stack or anything else. It's a good way to get started, but if everyone's following the same process and doing the same exact things, it becomes, you know, it becomes neutral again, right? So it doesn't really allow you to stand out. And so, good question, Vera, as far as the challenge that we're having is hiring managers, you know, because if internal HR departments and talent acquisition departments, they're the one posting the position for Salesforce, and they don't know Trailhead and they don't know badges, and that's just not what they're in tune to, unless they're a Salesforce consulting company and that's all they do. But typically, if you're applying to a position at in an industry or a company that has Salesforce as one of many applications that they're recruiting on, you know, those resumes that are kind of general with the Salesforce speak on them, they don't know what to do with it, right? So it's a challenge for themselves as an HR talent acquisition person to be able to, you know, because I've had hiring managers come to me complaining that the HR says, Chris, they won't send me any resumes because they don't know which ones to send me, right? And they're scared to send me any of them because they all look the same, right? So that's to me, that's one of the challenges that we're having with the programs, because it's becoming a mass production environment, right? And, you know, so many students are getting involved and applying for the same positions that, you know, if you took your name versus Stacy's name or someone else's name on a resume, at the end of the day, there's not going to be a whole lot of differentiation. That's why I think the digital portfolio and showcasing your skills and your personality and having some videos behind you are going to be what's going to differentiate you from someone else. You know, so, you know, I understand, and Town Stacker seems to have a lot of success, right? They posted statistics about how many people they've had graduate through the programs and how many people are getting jobs. So they're doing something right, but I think there's two sides to the story, right? Because there's thousands of people that are also in the program. Someone posted today on LinkedIn that I saw, he's been at it for 18 months. He's ready to pull the plug because he hasn't been successful at all, right? So I always take the things that you read about in any program with a grain of salt, because you're going to hear about all the positive things of it, but you don't actually hear maybe some of the negative side of it, or some of the statistics that help support the material that you're seeing on LinkedIn. And so, you know, it's tough though, because you know, the Salesforce terminology and the marketing spin around it just tends to, I guess, derail what your objective is and how to get in front of the hiring managers, because of the noise that come through on these programs. You know, if that makes sense, Vera.
Yeah, I think it adds a ton of context. It's like you said, you know, as things come out, and this isn't just like a problem for programs. I think this is something we can look at just in the world, where it's like, you know, hot new topic, Chat GPT. If you adopted that thing right off the bat, I remember I got on that thing like the first week it came out, and I felt like I had a superpower, because like nobody even knew what it was. I was just like, oh yeah, like I'm never telling anybody about this because this thing's awesome and it saved me a ton of time. And now here we are, right? A few months in, the world knows about it. Everyone's going to start incorporating it. You see thousands of businesses that are starting to involve OpenAI into their business, where it's just like, this is now going to become part of us, right? Like this is the next step forward. And it becomes more neutralized again, because it's no longer this thing where it's like, you knew about it and I didn't, right? So I think same idea with the programs. It's like, okay, well, yeah, when you first start, like a Talent Stacker and Bradley Rice, really good friends with him, awesome program, awesome information they share. But you're definitely right. It's like the more and more people that eventually do it, well, then the bar just becomes that much higher, because it's like, well, now we have thousands of people that have done it though. So that knowledge that was once shared with that program that seemed like the advantage, now it's just kind of common knowledge for everybody. So we're all back to the same playing field. And back to your point the whole time, which I've loved, is like, okay, well, that kind of gives you two options. It's either you can dig deeper and figure out how to go the extra mile to stand out, or you can go the other route, which is just like, this is tough and it is what it is, and kind of call it quits, right? So it is always that option, which I love that you keep sharing about whether or not you want to kind of figure out how to make yourself stand out. How do you dig deeper? How do you set yourself apart from your peers? And I think, at least in my experience, maybe you could say differently, but it feels like when that time comes, there is kind of that awesome moment where you do realize that, and you do realize that more people are going to kind of call it quits because they feel like the competition is tough. So then it's like, well, hey, if I am willing to put in that extra grind, that is my advantage right there, because it's like they're willing to quit and I'm not. So I'm going to keep going. And now this is a more of like a motivation thing that I'm going to compete on. Would you say the same, or you say?
I would say it's also tough because you have to look at your financial means as well. Not everyone can be without a position for 6, 12 months, however long it takes to land your first position. So I think everyone's personal circumstances comes into play when it comes to making a transition into the Salesforce career. But I also think there's other things that you can, if everyone's going for sales, and I've said this time and time again, like everyone's going for the Salesforce admin positions. But look around for other types of roles that are around technology or around Salesforce, right? It can be support analyst or a BA role, or it doesn't just have to be, the Salesforce admin title, right? I think sometimes we put too much emphasis on that title alone. There's so many supplemental positions out there in the industry that you just have to be somewhat intelligent to be able to search for these different roles within, just don't go to LinkedIn and look for Salesforce admin job titles, for example, right? Just be creative, maybe about CRM, for example, or around, sales or service or sales ops, right? Or data management. I mean, there's just so many different layers to these positions that I think you have to kind of figure out how to navigate through all the noise, and don't go straight for the same knockout punch that everyone else is going for.
Yeah, I like that too. And it does add those like other filters where you're looking as well, right? So it's like, okay, not only the title, but LinkedIn is obviously an easy way to go and apply for jobs, and Indeed is an easy way to apply for jobs. And then it's like, okay, well, if we look at this from maybe a different angle, yeah, it's going to be more work. Yeah, it's going to be a little harder, but that's where things like networking come into play, where it's like, even just your local area, I think you stand out way more. At least that's been my experience, where I've stood out way more when I apply for a job that happens to be local in a remote world. I think it adds this extra camaraderie where it's like, hey, cool. Like, we happen to be working for the last company I worked for was based in San Francisco, but for some odd reason, like everybody on my team was based in Utah. So it was kind of like this cool little, like, oh, sweet. Yeah. The whole Salesforce team happens to be from Utah, and that's a cool thing we have. And I felt like that kind of added an extra layer there to help me stand out when I was applying for it, because like, sweet, yeah, you're from Farmington. I live out here in, Saratoga or wherever. So I think it's like those extra layers, like you mentioned, where it's just like, okay, yes, the easy way is to apply on LinkedIn or whatever, but what else can you be doing? Who else would you know in the area? How else could you go applying about it? Have you messaged these people? Do you send DMs before you apply? Like, how are you actually going through that process versus just like a mass apply button and being like, hopefully one of these sticks and hopefully someone gives me a call back, right?
Right, that's right. And then even the industry background, right? So what is your industry background? Because I think that is a key distinguisher, right? If you can find the industry that you enjoy or that you have a history around and use that as a leverage to be able to network with people that are in the same industry and that are possibly local to you, local, same industry that also use Salesforce. I mean, come on, those are the things that you're going to be miles and miles ahead of anybody else because they don't have the same credentials as you do in that case. So if you have an industry background doing something you enjoy, there's probably a good chance that that industry has some flavor of Salesforce running, maybe even some local companies for you. That I think that would be, and even if they don't have a position posted, the thing is to build that relationship with the hiring managers because you never know if there's if you go to a couple of companies that are local to your area or that are in your industry and you see that there's Salesforce admins working there, network with them, network the hiring manager because you don't ever know that tomorrow that person could be leaving, right? Or they can have a position that they haven't posted yet and you're top of mind and then you can let them know that you're actively looking. And so if the hiring manager is kind of, maybe he has on his just coincidence, he has a desk on the job description that needs to review before HR can post it, and he just hasn't had a chance to do that yet. And you caught him at the right time. You'd be surprised about timing. And the more times that you put out fillers out there and reach out to folks, the better chances are of you succeeding. I mean, it's like me I'm in a sales role, right? So some more touches, some more people I connect with, some more phone calls I can make, and more emails I can correspond with. You got to have all those different communication channels to be able to get your name out there because you never know when the timing could be just happenstance where the hiring manager has a job description. You say, hey, Jordan, I'm looking for a new position. I saw that you have active Salesforce admins working there. Is there a chance to talk about, whatever your communication line is, just continue to have those, my point, because you may be surprised about right place, right time, positions open. You're the first name in the resume stack to have the conversation.
Yeah, exactly. And I wanted to say too, I think you do a lot of this. I try to do the same where it's like you're just kind of also doing these things where maybe they're not always directly helping you get that job, right? Like when I think about, I don't know, like in my consulting right now, a few people that have like been able to give me really high quality leads that have worked into jobs for me. When I look back at those relationships, they didn't spark because I was like, hey, give me like leads or whatever. It happened to just be organic where it was like the one that I was talking to that has helped me the most. He and I just kind of connected actually about YouTube stuff. He was getting ready to start his YouTube channel, saw that I'd had one, asked for some stuff around it, as well as like online courses. I decided to take the time. It was nothing like on my side that I was going to gain from it, but it was like he reached out, took some time, we met up and talked through it. And then at the end of the call, he happened to just be like, yeah, we used to be consultants. We're not really doing that anymore. So the leads we get, would you like want to take them from us? And I was like, sweet. Like I didn't even expect that, but yes, I would love that. Right. So I think there's things like that. And like you doing this is a great example where it's just like, you just coming in here, taking time out of your night to do this with us. But it's like, you never know who now might want to reach out and do X, Y, Z with you because you are kind of putting that good karma out there.
That's right. That's right. Sharing articles, sharing knowledge, sharing content, all those things, you have to understand that's the long game, right? And that's the only way to be successful, I think, when it comes to your transition in your career or, Jordan's success or my success is because you got to be in for the long run. If you're expecting a quick turnaround and you to post one time and expect to get a position, unfortunately, if it was that easy, everyone would be getting positions overnight, right? Unfortunately, it's those that are consistent with, and people have reached out to me for helping them recruit, and I have no idea how they heard about me or got my name, and it was through, either three people that were down the totem pole for me, right? Or they saw my name on a Reddit post, or they saw my name in Twitter, so I use all these different communication channels, and I'm always monitoring those and providing feedback or providing my opinion and things like that. And then if you think about spending, and I'm not saying don't, because one thing that I was challenged with last year is I was spending too much time doing that and it's eating up my whole day. So I couldn't be productive in other areas. But if you just dedicate, I don't know, an hour or 2 hours in any given day, maybe once in the morning and the afternoon, to be active on the social sites, right? That's going to continue to build those building blocks for you over the long term.
Yeah, love that. And I love the time management too. That's a great tip.
Yeah.
Are you okay with one last question? Then I definitely want to
Sure.
give you some time to plug anywhere that you'd like us to support you.
Yeah. Sure.
So one last question here from Vera, and it says, is it better to talk to the hiring manager / other Salesforce professionals at the company before you apply? What's your take on that?
I would. I mean, because here, especially if you're having a cover letter, right, and whatever intel you can get, or even in the summary section of your resume, like if you can get some additional intelligence about what's happening in the company and reaching out to the internal admins or the hiring manager's busy, that might be a challenge. But the one good thing about the Salesforce community as a whole is we love to give back, right? And so that's not saying everybody does, right? I'm just saying that you gotta, if you reach out to some admins about a company that you're interested in, let's say they just have 3 admins working there, and you reach out to those 3, and one of them responds back and says, hey, yes, talk for 15 minutes. I can talk to you about what I'm doing. I talk about our company and our initiatives. You have that insight scoop to help you bring that to light when you reach out to the hiring manager or you submit your resume. Can you imagine you like took some good bullet points on that conversation with your admin and then you use that to articulate in your summary section of your resume? I mean, to me, that's the golden goose right there to help get your name in the top of the pecking order.
Yeah, that's great advice. Helps you kind of customize exactly what you would say to the person too.
Right.
I've had experience like that where it's like learning beforehand that they have, something specific about what they do as a company because they're a health company. It's like, oh, well, I have a background on that. So I know now when I go into this interview, I'm basically all focusing all my efforts on when I worked at that other health company because that's what they do. And this is what they need help with, right? Like forget all the other knowledge. So that's super great advice there.
Right. And even if you don't talk to anybody internally because you're getting blown off or shrugged off, again, LinkedIn company website, annual report, quarterly report calls. There's just so much information that you can find out that you can use to your advantage without even talking to anybody, right? You can just do it on your own and find out a couple of bullet points that you can use to your advantage.
Great. Thank you so much for the advice there. Before we have you go, I definitely want to give you some time. Are there places like on social media we can follow you or products we can get from you or places to go like your website that you'd like us to kind of refer here?
Yeah, so just I'm on Twitter. I'm not that active on Twitter as I am on LinkedIn. My Twitter handle is just the CRM Recruiter on Twitter.
Okay.
And then the CRM Tech Recruiter is my tag name on LinkedIn. And then I'm on Reddit. I'm on there. I think it's CRM Recruiter on Reddit as well. I tend to chime in there every once in a while just to answer any questions that people have in the community about the job market or salary expectations. Things like that. So if we're not connected on LinkedIn, feel free to shoot me a LinkedIn request. I'm also open to reviewing your resume. If you feel like your resume needs some tweaking or just needs another set of eyes on it, always open to giving an opinion on your LinkedIn profile or your resume.
Okay, awesome. I also plugged a few things from your featured section. I know Garen posted them as well there to kind of go and look at that because you had some great like YouTube articles YouTube video, and then you had like a podcast there as ways to stand out, which I thought were great. So we've also plugged those as well for people to go and take a look at. Other than that, Chris, I really just want to thank you again for taking time out of your night to talk with us. Means a lot to us, and we'll keep in touch of when we get this posted for you so that we can kind of go from there and get it promoted where you need it to. Okay.
Okay. Sounds great, Jordan. Thank you for having me, and thank you everyone for attending today.
Yeah. Thank you guys. Well, I'll talk soon.
Thank you.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.